Okay, so we're live, I think. Looks like we are. Yeah, okay. So, uh, yeah. This is the fifth day we're playing this game. We played one case each day so far, and yesterday we finished the fourth case, which was the last one. So, in regards to the story, I think we finished. We're done with the story. But, whenever you finish a case, you're given a rank depending on the score you've accumulated throughout the case. And you can unlock additional puzzles depending on the rank that you've attained in each case. So if I leave the credit screen and go to the section called Scout's Memories, you'll see this, for example, for case 1, we have all of these puzzles unlocked. And we've completed it. We completed these ones already. We did this after completing case 1 on the first day. Right, so these are done. And then we did this, I believe, on the second day. I think we did all of them together as well. And then on case 3, for example, we have all of these puzzles that we haven't done just yet. We have them all unlocked because all of the cases have been finished with S rank, which was pretty fun. I'm really proud of having been able of doing that. But yeah, that means that now we have all of these puzzles unlocked to do, but we haven't done all of them yet. So I believe that's all we have left to do in order to complete this game 100%. So that's what I'm going to be doing today. This is not going to be a long stream at all. This should be taking us much more than an hour, if at all. And yeah. And after that, we're just going to view the memories of Scout. Whenever you complete one of the extra puzzles of a case, you unlock a memory of Scout. Here they are still locked because we haven't done all of the puzzles just yet. But yeah, they're unlocked in here. So yeah, we're gonna do all of the puzzles and we're gonna view all of the remaining memories of Scout. And I believe we'll have completed this game 100%. And yeah, after that, I don't know, we'll see what happens. So yeah, this is gonna be a pretty relaxing stream where we're just gonna be solving puzzles and nothing else. So yeah, let's go, let's continue. I believe we've done all of the F puzzles in here, which were these 3, and then the E puzzles in here, which were these 3. And then we have, yeah, all of these. So yeah, let's just go, I think. Yeah. believe it's a bit loud. I'm gonna turn it off. But yeah, okay. So that was what was it? Oh, I don't want to do this again. How do I? Okay. It's a bit of a roundabout way of exiting the puzzle. Yeah. Well, yeah, I did realize you don't have a way of exiting a puzzle once you started doing it. You can't like cancel it. There are some puzzles where that makes sense, right? Because they come as part of a scripted event. Like when there's a certain scene that's happening as part of the story, and then you're given a puzzle right in the middle of it, right? So you doesn't really make much sense to give the player an option to quit the puzzle and do it later. But there are some that you do. There are some where it does make sense because those are puzzles that you find somewhere, like literally laying on the street or whatever. So I think it would make sense to give the player the option to quit out of those puzzles. Um, I think, especially in these ones, right? Where you're literally picking them out of a menu. I think that's something that could be added. I think that would be a nice little quality thing that doesn't quite exist just yet. And just disable it on the puzzles that are part of the story. Yeah, that's something else to add to the conclusion once this whole process is done. I think that's still a little bit loud. Let's see what I can do. Okay. What's this? I don't think I've ever seen that word before, interestingly enough. Okay. Um, okay. for the next one. No, yeah, that's okay. That's okay. Oops. Yeah, okay, okay. Cool. Okay, so we've made a mistake somewhere. In here? Probably, okay. Oh, okay. Something's going on here. Let's clear all of that, because I think that's where the problem is. Let's just do it again. That's a 5 and that's a 5, okay. That's a 2. Yeah, okay, so the problem is somewhere else. Okay. Okay, let's just keep doing something else. Is it just one? Something about that, I think. Ooh, I'm not sure. I'm really not sure. It seems to be something. Okay, okay, okay. Oh, I don't know what I'm doing. I think I'm making everything worse. Yeah. No, I think that was alright. It's a 4, 1, 2. Yeah, okay, okay. Oh, I don't know. I'm sure we made a mistake somewhere. The question is where is it? So that I can fix it, right? Oh, that's gotta be that. Sorry, this column has to be like that. That doesn't change. Right, so that's the case. And this can't be anything. And this can't be anything. Yeah, and this 11 is at least that. That's a 1, so that's a 2. That's a 2. That's a 1 and that's a 2. That's a 1. And let's delete all of that for now. That's a 3. That's a 2. That's a 3. That's a 1. Okay, so that's like that. Okay. Okay, okay. This 11 is that. 1, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we have that and we have that. Okay, so we're missing all of this. So that's for sure how it is. Right? That's a 2. That's a 2 as well. Oh, so it's gonna be like this. Okay. I think? Yeah, I'm pretty sure there isn't any other way. No, that's not right. Yeah. Yeah, Okay, so I'm not certain. One of these has to be it, and two of these have to be. Up to? I don't know if they have. Yeah, they have to because they. Okay, so that can't be anything. Okay, so that's something. So that's a 3. So that's for the remaining ones. Okay. That's 1, 2, 1. Okay, I think we fixed it. Maybe. Let's see. Looking promising. Yeah, I think we did it. Okay, let's go. There we go. It's a radio. Okay. Alright. Cool. Now what? That's 5 and an 8. Oops. This is a 1 and an 11. No, what did I do wrong? Oh, okay. That's 5, 2, 4 and 5. That's oh, okay. Okay, that's a good column. That's a 2. This has to be the 4. Okay. Yeah, this can't be part of the 4, so it has to be the 1. Okay. Okay. There we go. It's a roller skate. Cool. I used to do that. Yeah, okay. Can I change the volume? It sounds super loud on my end. Okay. Okay, I think that's okay. I hope it's okay. Alright, let's keep at it. Oops. Okay. Oh, okay. Think that fixes it? Maybe, let's hope. Otherwise we're gonna find ourselves in some trouble later down the line. But no, I think we're doing okay. Oops. Oh, okay. So my lights just blinked. Because we've been having sort of heavy downpour just today. So I think it's possible, I don't know how likely, but it's possible that my lights might just go out. So the stream might just get cut off at some point, suddenly. Let's hope that doesn't happen. But yeah. Just in case. Oh. There we go. What's this? Ooh, it's a dumpster. Let's go. Okay. That's 5, 6, I believe that's the whole thing. Not quite. Okay. That'll put us and 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, that's either. That might. One, two, three, 4. 1, 2, 1, 2. Hmm. Okay. Oh, okay. I don't think that's super helpful. Oh, okay. Okay. Right. Yeah. Okay. Alright. That was too much. That's 2, that's a 2. That's a 3, so that's a 1. That's a 3. It's a 1, a 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. That's probably that. That's nothing. That's a 1. That should be a 3. And that's 2. Oh, that's made already. Okay. It's 4, we have that already. It's a 4, yeah. Okay. Okay. that means that's a 1. Okay. That's the whole column done. That's a 5, so that's that column done as well. Okay. Let's go. Alright. That's a 7 up there. And then it's okay, that's a 7 up to there. That's an 8 up to there. 2, 2, 3, and 5. Okay. That's a 2. That's a 3. Right. Okay, okay, I think that's right. Yes, it is. But I wasn't sure. Okay, for a moment there, I sort of wished there had been an undo button. It's okay, it's okay. I didn't need it. But it would have been... I would have used it if it had been there, if it existed. Okay. I guess that's something to take into consideration as well. One. Oh, we're missing something. Oh, it's gonna be like that, right? Okay. Okay, there we go. What's this? A bird! Alright. Yeah, I can see it. Cool. Let's see, where do we start? I think this is a good place. Okay. Oh, that's a 7 that I didn't see. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 1, 1, 1. Okay, this is so a complete row. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's 4. That's a 2, so that's a 1. So there we go. Okay, that has to be a 1. That's a 3, and that's a 3 as well. 1, 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, yeah. 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Okay. That's a 4, so that's that. That has to be a 3 actually. Okay, so that's a 3 as well. That's a 4. That's a 2, that's a 1. So that's a 3 in there. 3. Also a 3. That's a 4. That's a 1. That's a 1. Those are 1s as well. Well, that's that. That's a 2. And that's a 1, 2, 1. That's a 4. That's a 3 and a 1. So that's done. That's a 2, so that's done. That's done as well. It's a 5. Okay. That's a 2. Okay. Okay, that's a 6. Let's go. That's a 2. Okay, that is complete, I believe. So that's a 3, and that's complete. That's a 1, 1, 1. 3. That's a 6. 4. That is a 2. That's a 3. That's a 6 is there. That's a 3. This is a 1. It is a 2, that's a 1, that's a 4. That's a 2. 1, 1, 1, there we go. That is... could be anything. This could be anything as well. Well, that's a 1, so that's a 1, so that's a 1. And that's a 7 then. And those are all 2s. likely that could be this way. But I'm not sure. Oh, well, that's done as well. That's a 1. 1, 2, 3. Okay. It's a 3, so that's nothing. 3, 5. Okay. That's a 2. So that's nothing. So that's the 1, so that's the 5. So that's the 2 and the 2. That's a 2 and 1. That's a 1. That is a 5. That's a 3. That is a 2 of the 2 and the 1. It's a 3, 2, and 1, 2. That's a 3. And we're missing this one. Okay. It's a wig. A wig. Okay. Cool. That's really good. Okay. What do we have next? Okay. 2, 1, 1, 1, 1. Okay. 9 in here, 11 down here. 2 and 2. Which ones? That's a 4. That's another 11. Okay. That's a 3, so that's a 3. Since the 9, that's the 3. It's a bunch of 1s, and another bunch of 1s. That's a 1 as well. Okay. That's the 2. The 9 and the 10. This has to be a 2. And that's a 2. And that's a 1. So that's the 9. That's the 11, I think. No, that's the 11. And so it's here. 2. 3. 4. Okay. That's a 3, so that's the 3. That's a 3, that's a 3, that's the 11 done, that's the 4, that's a 1 and 1. 1 in there for the 10, the 2. We're missing a 1. Could be either of the 2. No, it has to be this one. Okay, that's a 2. That's a 10, that's a 2. That's a 2, that's a 2. That's a 3. Another 1. Okay. What's this looking like? Another wheel? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay. That's an 8. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. That's a 1. That's a 1 and a 2. That's a 6. That goes up to there. That's a 1. That's a 3 and a 1. Then 6. That's a 3 and a 1. That's another 1. That's a 2. That's a 4. That's nothing. That's a 3. That's the 1. That's a 1 as well. So that's nothing. And that's nothing as well. That's a 1 in there and another 1. And this could be it. Well, that's missing a 2. That's a 1 as well. Since the 9, I believe. That's another 1. That's a further 3, just like that. That's a 1, 1, 2, and 1. That is complete. That 3. No, that is not helpful. This is 6, so that's 8. Okay. So that's a 1. That is a 6. That's another 1. So 1 and a 3 somewhere. That's missing a 1, so that's that. That has to be a 3 then. That's a 1 as well. That has to be a 1, so that's a 1. That's a 1. That's a 1. That's a 1 and that's a 3. This is another 1 somewhere. Oh no. No, I did something wrong. What is it? What is it? I believe it's like this. Ooh, I don't know. What did I do wrong? Okay. Oh, there's one too many here. here. Oh, there we go. Oh, what's this? Oh, the club sign, alright. Oh yeah, it's a little ship, I can see that. Cool. Okay. We have 4 more for the 3rd case. Let's go, let's go. Okay. 111, 101, 17, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and 1, 1, 2, and 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, that's a 3. Has to be there. Oh, that 2. That's a 2. That's 3, so that's a 2. That's 2, and that's a 2 as well. 1, 1, and 1, 7. I believe this is a full row. Okay. Let's go to 6. That's right there. 1, 1, 1. Okay. That's a 3. That's a 2. That's a 3. This is part of an 8. That's a 2. That's a 6. This has to be the 3, and this has to be part of the 3. So that 4 is after there, that 3 can't go beyond there as well as this 5. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. Okay, that's a 2 on the 1. That's a 3. Okay. 1, 1. Okay, 3. Yeah, I don't know about that. 5 and 3. Okay. Okay, I know something about this, and something about this. Not much else. 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 1, 2, 4. Well, this has to be part of the 3. Okay. Okay, okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay. 5. Okay. 3. 3. Doesn't have to be the 2. This has to be the 2 on the 3. Okay. Okay, that's a 2. Whoops, that's a 2. That is a 4. That's a 2 on the 1. 1, 2, 1. And a 3. That's a 5. Okay, that is a 1. That's a 6. So that's the 1. So that's the 8 over there. That's a 1. That's a 2 in here. And the 1 in here. Okay, okay. Oh, that's a 1. That's a 2. That's a 6. That's a 5. Right. I think so, yeah, that's a 1. That is a 4. That's a 6. That's a 4 and a 1. Okay, that is a 1 in there. That is a 1 in there. That's a 1 there. So that's the 7, the 2, the 3. Sure. That is a complete 10. Okay. That's a 1 and a 1. That's a 4 and a 2. That's a 1 and a 1. That's a 1. That's a 3. That's a 2. That's a 4. And that is full puzzle. Okay. What's this? Trash bags. Yeah, let's go. Okay. 3 more. Let's go. Okay. So 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's a 3. That is not a 4. That is a 4. 1, 1. That's a 1. That's 3. 3. Yeah, that's not much. It's a 2 on the 1. On the 7. On the 1. 3, 1, 2, 4. Okay. 1 and 2. Okay, there we go. What else? What else? Well, that's a 4, so I can cross these out. That's a 6, so that's nothing. 1, 1, 1, 1. That could be a 2. Not this one. Okay. Okay, so this is a 3, and a 1, then a 2. It sounds to be a 4. That's at least a 2. That's a 1. So that's a 4, that's a 1, and a 5. So that's the 2 and the 3. That has to be the 6. So that's a 3. That has to be 7. Out of the 7. That has to be a 2 and a 1 and another 1. That's a 4. That's not a 4. That's a 1. That is a 1 as well. Okay, that's a 2, so that's a 3. That's a 1, 2, 2, 3, 1. Okay, that's a 2, so that's fine. Okay. What else? Well, that's for the 6. That's a 2, that's a 3, that's a 3, that's a 4, that's a 1. Okay. That's 4. That has to be the 4. But this one I don't know just yet. That's the 6, so that's the 3. 4 can't go beyond there. Okay. Oh, 3 and 3, let's go. That's a 1, that's a 1. That's a 1. Oh, that's nothing, that's nothing. That's a 2 and a 1. Okay. And that's a 1 and a 1 in there, that's a 2, that is nothing. That is a 1. That's what, a 4, that's a 2 and a 1. That's a 3, yeah, I don't know much. Oh, never mind. That couldn't be anything then. Unless I'm doing something wrong. Okay, that limits the 7, the 3 goes there, that's a 1. That makes the 4 to be there. So this is the 1 on the 2, I think? No, I must be doing something wrong. Yeah, I must have done something wrong here. Yeah, I don't trust too much this corner down here, so let's delete all of that. Let's delete all of that. Yeah, so that's a 3. Okay. So that's a 3. That's 1, 1, 2, 3. Okay. That's apparently nothing, which makes this is a 2, this is a 3. I mean a 4. Okay, so that's a 1, that's a 1. That's a 3 there, that's a 4, 4 and 6, that's a 2. That completes this part. Doesn't complete it. Doesn't have a job to get us 54. Okay. That's a 3. That increases the 4. Okay, so that has to be a 3. Okay. Yes. That's a 2. Okay, that's a 4. That's a 2 on the 2. That's nothing. That's the 3. That's a 1. So that is a 2 on the 1. Okay. That's a 1 and a 2. Okay, so we were right thing with that? For the most part? I think so. I think so. We're doing alright so far. Yeah, okay, okay. So that's complete. That is a 2 on the 4. Okay. So for once, that's a 2, and there we go. It's a fire island. Okay. Cool. And the 2 last ones. 2 S puzzles that we would have missed had we not replayed that case. Okay, 7 and 5. 3, 1, 1, 1. That's a 1. It's 2 on the 1, on the 1. Okay. That's a 3. That's a 1. That has to be the 2, so that, what's that? That's probably 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so that's 2, and that's 3. This is one of the ones. Not much else. That's a 1, I think. Has to be, yeah. One, 1, 3. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5. Okay. 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 Oh, rock on. Whoops. Okay. Alright. Great. Let's go. We're making some progress. Okay. Alright. 54. Yeah, okay. That must be a 5. Let's go. That's 52, so that's a 4, that's a 5. That's a 1. That's a 5, that's a 3. That is a 2, so that's a complete. That is a 3 and a 1. That's a 4 in there, that's a 1, that's something. Oh, can't be anything. Okay. Alright. Okay, let's see, what else? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Yeah, not much in there, I don't think. That's a 7, that's a 6. That's a 1, that's a 1. That's a 5, that's a 4, and a 3. That's a 3 as well. Okay. Oh, that's a 4. That's a 3, 2. That's down, that's a 3. Yeah, that could still be anything. Well, that's nothing. That's a 3, pretty sure. Pretty sure that can't be anything. But that can't be anything. No, that's a 2. Yeah, okay. That can't be anything. So that's a 7. That's a 2, so that's a 1. That's a 3, so that's a 7. That's a 2, that's a 3. 1, 2. 4 is down, so that's a 4. That's a 4 in there, so that 3 is complete. That 6 is complete, so that 3 is complete. That's a 2, that's a 1. That could be something. That's a 2, so that's nothing, that's nothing, that's a 5. But that's nothing, that's nothing, that's a 2. 2, 2, 2, 2, okay. 2, 2, 3, 2. Okay. And 4, 6, 3, 2. Okay, that's done. 3, okay. How do we do this? I believe it's like this? Yeah. What's this? A cocktail shaker. Alright. And the last one. For this case at least. That's a 3 and a 1 and a 1. 2, 8. Okay. 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Okay. Cool. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, that's 1, 1, 2, 3, 4. Whatever by 1, 1, 2, 4. Okay. Oh, those two. Okay. Oops. Okay. 6. That's a bunch of 1s. 1, 1. That's a bunch of 1s. So is that, and so is that. Okay. 1, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. Oh, this one. Okay. Okay. That's a 3 somewhere there. That's about 6. One, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay. 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, that's 6. Got that 4. That's a 1. 4 has to be here. The 6 has to be here. Okay. Okay, oops. That's a 2. That has to be a 2, and this has to be the 4 and 1. That's a 5, that's a 1 and 2. It's a bunch of 1s. Okay, linked to 5. That's a 2. But could be a 1 or a 2. Has to be a 2. Okay. This is a 6, this is an 8. This is a 1, that is a 1 as well. That is a 4. This can't be a 2, so this is a 4. That's a 2 on the 2, that's a 1. That's a 6, so that's a 3, and that's a 1. That's a 4, that's a 1 and 6. That's a 3, that is a 4. That's a 2, that's a 3. That 6 is done. That's a 4. That's not a 3, that's a 3. That's a 3. Okay. 2. That's done. Okay. That's a 2. That's a 1, that's a 2, that's a 1, that's a 1 because this is a 4. That's a 1, 2, 1, 2. This is nothing. That has to be a 2 as well. That's a 2 on a 1, that's nothing, that's a 2. And this is also 3, the 2 has to be here. Okay, this is shoulder. That extends to 6, that's a 1. That's a 2, 2. That's a 1, that is a 5. That is a 12, that's a 1, that's a 1 then. That's 1, 2, so that's the 1. That is a 3, that's a 1 and 1. Well, that's nothing, and so is this. So that's a 2, that's nothing, that's nothing. That's a 1 and 2, so that's a 1. That's a 2, that's a 1 there. That's a 3, that's a 1, and that's the last 1. Let's go. What's this? Nail polish. Cool. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Yeah, so at this point, we've done all of the puzzles for case 3, of the extra puzzle for case 3. Just now we have unlocked this memory, but there was no fanfare or anything, so I didn't even realize that we had. The first time I played this, I didn't notice. Yeah, so this is the first case we did, and I didn't even realize that this was here locked. They're locked at the start. And I completed all of them, and I didn't realize it had unlocked. So that's something that should also happen. Auto change like that, I think, should be given more fanfare so that the player notices. Yeah, okay. I should be writing these things down because I'm actually noticing some things. I'm gonna do that just really quickly. First thing I noticed is that mouse controls are actually pretty cool. I found myself enjoying them very much. The last thing I said, like do the fanfare, when player does something noteworthy, right? Like unlocking something. Okay, what else? There was something else. I don't remember what it was. Oh yeah, the cross puzzles. It would be pretty neat if the player had the option to undo the last movements. I don't know how many that would be appropriate, right? There's another game I'd be playing on my phone that keeps track of all the moves you've done, so you can undo all of them. So yeah, I don't know how many that should be. The option should be there, right? Should allow to undo. And also, they should allow to just close it. So allow the player to close out of the menu. I mean, out of the puzzle. Or quit. A non-story relevant or non-story critical puzzle. Okay. Anything else? I think there was something else. I don't quite remember what it was, which is why I should be writing them down. But yeah, I have 4 things, so you know, I think that's pretty good enough. And there has been some other things that I've noticed throughout the other cases that I don't quite remember right now. But that's why I'm recording them, right? That's the whole point. Anything else? Anything else I remember right now? I don't think so. What is that say access denied? Oh, that's the name of the memory. Okay. Okay, that's... Yeah, okay. Do you remember anything else? I'll give it like 10 more seconds. If I don't remember, I'm just gonna continue with the puzzles, right? Was there anything else? No, I guess not. Okay, let's continue then. Cool. Let's go into case 4, which we managed to complete with rank S from the beginning. Right, let's just start, I guess. Cool. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, that's a bunch of ones. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, that's not good, but that's not super helpful at this moment. Oh, that's a 4 and a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, and the 4. Could that be anything? Yes, it could. Okay. That has to be a 1. Since the 5 have to be there. That's a 1, 1, and a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's a 3. That's a 1 and a 7. That's a 4. That's a 5 and the 3. That's a 4 and the 2. That looks at those. That's nothing. That's a 3. That is a 1. This is a 3 and a 1. That's a 3. That is a full-on 7 all the way there. And that's a 1 and a 1. 3. That's a 2. That shouldn't be there. Okay. 2, 1. 4. 1, 1, 4. That's also over there. That's a bunch of 1s. That's a 3 and a 2. Cool. That's a 3. That's a 1. That's a 2 and a 1. That's a 2 on the 1 and a 5. That's what I'm missing 1s, I think. That's a 2. Okay. That's a 1. That's a 1 as well. So that's a 4. That's a 4 row. That's a 3. That's a 1, 1, 1. And so is that. Okay. That's a 3. That's a 1. That's a 6. That's a 2. 1, 2, 1, 3. Okay. That's a 4. So that's a 2 and 3. That's a 4 and 6. So that's a 3. That's a 9. That's a 1 and a 1. That's a 3. That's a 4, 3. Okay, that's a 2 and 3. Okay, that's a 4. A 1 and a 4 and 1. That's a 2. That's nothing. That's a 2. That is a 1 and 2 and 1. That's complete. That's complete. That's a 1. That's a 3 and 1. Cool. Stapler. Okay. Cool. Alright, let's keep going. 8, 8, 4. That's a 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, that's a 6. That could be 8. 6. 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 2. Okay. Okay. That's a full on 7. Alright. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. That's a 4. Okay. 2, 4. Yeah. This is 2 on the 1. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. Okay. Four. Okay. This looks at this, I believe. Yes. But that's a 2 on the 5. That doesn't help me that much. This has to be the 2. Okay. has to be a 2, and this is a 3, and this is a 2. And this is a 2, and this is a 2. Okay. That's a 2, so that extends to 8. Oh, that is like that. Okay, 2. That 4 is done. That's a 1. That's a 3 this way and this way. That's a 2. Okay. That's a 5. That's a 3. So that's a 3 in here. That's a 6. That's a 3. That's a 7. That's a 5. Okay, that's a 2. That's a 6. 4, 5, 4. That's complete. That's complete. Okay. That's a 2, 1, 1, 2, 3. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, that's a 5. That's a 3. That's a 1, 2, and 7. Okay, that's a 2. That's a 2. That's a 2. That's a 6. That's a 6. That's a 2. That's a 3. That's a 5. So that's the 1 and the 3. That's a 2, and that's a 3 and 5. That's a 4 and a 2, and that's a 2 and 3, and that is 1 and 2 and 3. Okay, that's a 2 complete. That's a 1 and 2 right there. That's done. That's done. That's done. That's a 2. 2, 2, 2, 2. That's a 1. Okay, that's 1. That's nothing. That's a 3 in there. That's a 2. That's a 1. That is that's still a 1. Yeah, that's still conclusive. That's nothing. Well, that's not. So that's a 3. That's a 1. I'm still missing a 1. Somewhere here. Okay. Oh, okay, no, never mind. That's a 7, so that's a 1. Yeah, that's the one I'm missing here, that's the one I'm missing here, and that's the one I'm missing here. Okay. It's a book. Oh, filing folder. Okay. I love me some office supplies. 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 3. That's a 3. That's 2, that's a 3, and 3, and 2. Okay, that's a 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's a 4, 3. That's a 2. That's part of the 4. That's a 1. Okay. That's 5. That's nothing. Oh, that's another 1 and 3. Okay. That's a 1. That's 2 and 2. That's a 1. That is a 5. And that is 5. 2, 3, 5. 2. Oh, that's 4. That's 5, 2, and 1. That is 4. That's 2. Okay. That's a 1. That's at least 2. Actually, it has to be a 3. Never mind. That's a 2. That's a 3. And another 1. 2. Okay, 3. That's a 4. That's a 2. That's a 3. Okay. That's a 2. That's a 1 and a 1, 2, 3. That is a 1. That's a 1. That's a 1 as well. 3. Okay. That's a 3. That's a 3. That's a 3. That's a 1. So that's a 3. That's a 1. That's a 2. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. 1, 1, 2. 3. And it's a 1, 1, 1. That's a 1. That's nothing. Those are 1s. Those are 1s. That's one of the ones we're missing. So that's nothing. That's a 3. That's a 3. That's a 2. So that's a 1. That's complete. That's a 2. And it has to be the white one's true. So that's a 1. That's nothing. That's a 1. That's a 2. That's a 1. Okay. That's nothing. That's a 2. Oops. That's a 2, I mean. That's a 3. That's a 3. That's a 3 and a 1. That's a 2. That's a 1. And in here, yeah, that's nothing. So that's a 1. That's, okay, yeah. Cool. Charming. Okay. Keep going. Okay, so it's 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 2, 3, 4. Let me say 7, that's nothing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. 1, 1, 1, 1. Here. 1, 1. Okay, okay, okay. 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Oh, there's a 7 in there. It's 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, okay, okay. Um, 1, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, 3, 4. Okay. How helpful is that? I don't think it's too helpful just yet. Hmm. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, that doesn't help yet. Oh, it's 2 and 1. Okay, so that is a complete row. Okay, 3, that's 2, that's 2, that's 6 right there. That's a 2 and that's nothing. That is a 1 and 3. That's a 2. That's a 1. Okay. That's a 2, so that's a 3. That's a 2. And that's a 2 as well. That's a 4. That's 2, so that's nothing. This is a complete column. Okay, this is a 1, not part of the 2. That's a, oops, that's a 3 and that's a 4. And that's a 3 and that's a 2. Okay, so this 7 goes up to there. That's a 1. This is a 2, so these, all of these are nothing. This is a 7, it goes up to there. This is a 2, this is an 8. This is either the 2 or the 1. Yeah, this is a 1. Okay, so yeah, not just yet, so quite conclusive. That's 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's a 1. That's a 3. Okay. That's a 2, so that's nothing. That's a 4. That's a 1. Yeah, okay. That can't be the 2, so that's a 4. Okay. After 3, that's a 2. That's nothing, so that's a 1 and 2. That's nothing, so that's a 3, that's a 2 in there, that's a 2 and 2. That's a 2. That's nothing, and so it's not. That's a 2. That's nothing. That's a 2. That's nothing. That's a 1. So that's a 2. That's a 2. So that's a 1. That's done. That's a 1. That's a 2. That's a 2. Okay. That's a 1. This has to be a 1. It's a 2 and that's a 2. Okay. So 1, 1, 1, 2. Just yet. I think that's done. Okay, that makes this a 2. That's nothing, so that's a 2, that's a 4, 8. That's a 2, that's a 5, that's a 1, that's a 1, and so is this. This is for the 6, that's a 1, that's a 8, that's a 1, 1, 1. That's a 2. Okay, that's a 1, and that's a 1 complete. So where have we made a mistake? Oh, whatever. Okay, and we are done. Cool. What's this? A robotic arm. That's 1. That's 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's a 1. That's a 3. This is a 4 and 6. That's a 3. That's a 2. That's a 2. That's a 2. That's the 8 done. That is a 3. So that's a 4. 4, 4. That's a 6. This is all done. This is all done. This is all done as well. I believe it's gonna go. No, not yet. Because that's 2, and a 1, and a 4. 4. That's a 1, that's a 1, sorry. That's nothing, so that is a 4 and a 5. Okay, that's a 5. That's 2, and a 1. That's a 1 as well. So this is nothing. Well, actually, that 2 goes there, and that 3 goes there. So yeah, that's a 2. That's nothing, that's nothing. That's a 1, so that's nothing, so that's a 2. That could be the 1. That's nothing. Okay, let's see. 3, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, no. 3, 3. Okay, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. That. Oh. 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 4. Yeah, so that can't be it. So that has to be the 2 and a 1. But that's a 1, that's one of the 2, so that's a 3, so that is. That's nothing, so that's a 3, that's a 4, that's a 2, that's a 2, that's nothing, that's a 4. Okay. That's nothing, that is a 2 there, that's a 3, that's a 3, that's a 2, that's a 1, that's a 2, that's a 3. And that's a 5 up to there, that's a 3 and 2, that's a 1, that's a 3 and that's a 3, that's a 2, that's gotta be the 1, so that's nothing as well. That is 6 up to there, that's a 2, so that's nothing. That is a 2, that's a 1 and a 1. That's a 6, okay, and 2. That's a 1. That's nothing, that's a 2. Okay, that's a 2, so that's nothing, that's a 2. That's a 1, that's a 2. 2, 2. There we go. It's... Oh, from the ship. Okay, from the yacht. Oh. 12. 7. Bunch of 1s. Okay. That's nothing. That is not a 12. That's a 1. It's a 1 on 1. So are these? These are all 1s. That's not a 10. These are all 1s. And so are these. That has to be a 3. Okay. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those are 1s. That has to be the 4, so that has to be a 1. So yeah. No new info just yet. Okay. This has to be a 6. Okay. That's a 2, that's a 1, that's a 1, that is there, that's a 1, so that's a 4, that's a 4, that's a 3 and 2 and 3, okay, so that's a 2, so that's a 1, okay, alright, this is a 6, so that is also down all the way, that has to be a 3, that can't be anywhere else. Okay, this has to be a 1. This is 3. This has to be a 1 as well. Okay. That accepts the 6. 4 goes there. That's nothing. So 1, 1. That's a 2. That's a 2. That's the 2. Okay. And bim. Alright. 1, 2. That's nothing. So that's nothing. so that's a 2, so that's a 3, okay. But that can't be anything, so that's a 4 column, so is this. That can't be anything, so the 2 goes there. Okay, that's a 1. Actually, okay. Okay, okay. Is this it? I don't know. Well, this is 2. So that's nothing. This isn't anything as well, but that's not so helpful right now. Except for this, okay. Alright. Well, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, okay. That's a 2, that's a 2, that's nothing, that's complete, that's a 2, studies in 12 up to there, that's a 1, that's a 1, that's a 6. So that's nothing, that's a 2, that's a 1, that's a 10. Okay. It's a filing cabinet. Or a disk drawer, okay. Cool. So the next one. Okay, 9. That's 1, 1, and 1. Okay, stupid one. Okay. This is part of the 4 regardless. We have a 1, 7. And we have a 2, 8. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. What else do we have? 3, 8. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. That's 2. So 1 and 1. Okay, and the 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Cool. That has to be a 1, which means it extends all the way to there. That can be the 4. 2, 6 extends to there. That goes all the way to there. Okay, that's a 1, 3, 1. 1, 2, 3, okay. Cheapers. I'm not sure. It's 1, 2, 3, yeah, okay, that doesn't help. This could be anything. I'm pretty sure I'm missing one, that's pretty obvious. Well, I don't know if it's obvious, but I'm missing something definitely. It's not this one, right? It's gonna be the 7, there's no way. Yeah, which one am I missing? It's not this one. No, this could be the 1 or the 2, this could be any of the 3 possible ones. It has to be a 2, but I don't know which way. This has to be part of the 4. But I don't know anything about these 2 or these 3. This 9 doesn't help me much. That's a 4. This is it. It's 1, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. That's 2. That's nothing. That's a 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay. 2. Okay. Okay. That's some progress apparently. That's nothing. I don't know. That would have helped. The 6. But it can help here. Okay. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 6, 7. Okay. And that's nothing, and that's nothing. So that's the 6, and that's a 3 in there, so that's a 1, 1. Okay. That's a ballista 2. So there's that. That's that. That's a 7. So it can't extend beyond that. That's a 2. That's a 1, that's not a 3, that's a 4. That's a 3. That's not a 1. That's a 7. That's a 2. That's a 3. That's a 2 and a 4. That's a 2, so that's the 3. That is the 9. That's a 3 and a bunch of 1s. That's a 3. That's a 2. That's a 1. So that's a 4. That's a 2 complete. That's a 2. So that's all there. That's a 1. On the 4. That's a 3. That's a 3 there. That's complete. So that's all. So that's part of the 6. That's a 1. That's a 3 there. That's complete. So that's a 4. That's nothing. That's a 3. That's an 8. That's a 4. That's 5. Okay. That has to be the 2. So that's nothing. That's nothing as well. That's nothing. That's the 3. That's the 2. That's a 5. That's not the 2. So that's nothing. That's nothing and that. That's a 3. That's done and done. So that's a 2. That's a 4. That's complete actually. So that's a 2. That is nothing. Okay. That's an 8. That's a 2. That's 7 goes down to there, and that's the 1. We have a computer mouse. Ooh. Alright. Let's keep going. 11. Any other big number I'm missing? I don't think so. 6, 3, 2, 2, and a bunch of 1s. That's an 8. That's a 2, so that's a there. Yeah, that's a bunch of 2s. That's a 1. And that's a 1 as well. That's a 4. That's nothing. That's a 1 and a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That starts from earlier, so it stopped earlier. 6% to there. That 3 can't extend beyond that. That's a 2. Okay, that's not there. The 6 goes. Okay, that's partially for the 6. Okay, that's nothing. This has to be part of the 3, so that's a 2 and that's a 5. The 2 goes there. That's a 1. That's a 1 as well. That could be 2. Or it could be a 1. That's a 4. In any case. That's a 1. That's also a 4. That's a 1. It's the 2s are at the bottom. Okay. That's a 4. Okay. That's an 11, I think. Whoops. Well, I can extend the 8, I think. Yep. That's 6, anything. 1, 1, 2. Okay. That's a 1. Okay. Pretty sure. There's gonna be a 1. This is a 4, and this is a 4. Okay, so these are nothing. That's nothing as well. Oh, actually, could be. Well, this has to be something. That extends the 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, there's a bunch of 1s. That's a 3, and that's a 4. That's a bunch of 2s. That's a bunch of 1s. Okay. That's a 3, I think. That's a 6. Cool. That's a 2. That's a 3 complete. So that's nothing. That's a 1, right? That's a 1, 1. Of 6. That's a 1, so that's a 2, so that's complete. So that's a... Ooh. That has to be a 2, I'm pretty sure. It doesn't fit anywhere else. That's a 2, so that's a 6. That's a 1. That's complete. That's a 1. That's nothing. That's an 11. So that's a 2 complete. That's not a 2. Nothing else in here. Okay. That's a 3. That's complete. That's a 2. That's a 1. And that's an 8. That's a 3. That's a 6. So that's all done. It's a 1 and a 1. That's a 4. That's a 1. So that's a 1. That's a 1 in there. So that is 4. Oh, well. That's a 2 and a 1. Well, that's a 1 in there. that's one there. That's a 4. That's 1, that's a 4. Let's go. It is oil drums. Okay. Cool. Okay. Let's keep going. That's an 11. Oops, that's too much. That's 9. 2, 2, and 2. Okay, that is a 4. So that's at least a 2. So that's nothing. That's 7 to 9. Okay. So that's the 2 and that's the 3. Cool. That's a 7. That's a 3. That's nothing. That's not as well. Yeah. Okay. Alright. This is far as we go that side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 4 and 3 and 2. That's a 2, that's 4. Oh, that has to be a 2, so it has to be at least a 2. So that's a 1. 2, 3, 4, 5. Possibly 5 actually. Okay. So here goes the 2, that's a 4, 4. That's 6, that's 7, that's a 3. Could be the 1 or the 6. That's a 2, so that's nothing. 1 and 1, 2, 4. 1, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, that's a 4. That's a 2, that's a 1. Okay. 2, 2, yeah. Well, the 3 has to be here, and the 2 has to go there. So that's a 1. So these are the 2. So 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay, that's a 1, that's a 2, that's a 2, that's a 2 as well, that's a 2. We are doing a staircase, aren't we? That's a 4. Okay, that's a 1. That's a 3, that's a 5. That's a 1. That is a 1, 1, 1, 2, 3. Okay. Well, that's complete, and that's complete, and so is that. So yeah, that's there, that's a 2, that's complete. That's a 2. Okay. That's a 3, and that's at least a 2. Oh, these are nothing, so that goes like that, that's a 7, so this is a 6. So that's a 1, so that's nothing. Yeah, this has to be part of the 2, so that's a 3, so this is a 5, so this is nothing. That's nothing. That's a 2. And so is this. So this is a 1. That's nothing, and that's nothing. That's a 2. That's a 2 as well. So it's that, so it's that, and so is that. Yep, it was a staircase all the way through. That's a 1. That's a 3. That's a 4. Okay, that's a 1. That's a 4. That's a 3. That's a 2 and a 2. That's a 1 and a 2. That's a 2. Again, that's a 1. That's a 3. This is a 5. So it goes like that. That's a 1. That's a 1. That's a 4, 6. This is a 3. This is a 4. This is a 1. This is a 3 and 2 complete. That's a 5. That's a 1. That's a 1. Sandwich. Cool. I just had a sandwich. Let's go. Okay, it's a glitch one. We gonna start from here, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yes, that doesn't seem too helpful. I think we can do this. 6. Yeah. Okay, that's not all that helpful, I don't think. Or maybe it is. You know, we're just gonna be playing. We're just gonna keep playing. Okay. Now. So, that's a 6. 1, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, that's a 1, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Well, the 6 has to stop there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Oops, okay. This has to be the 5. so it can't extend beyond that, so it can't go here. Yeah, okay. 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then here we have that and 3 more. Okay, so that's a 6, that's a 3, that's a 2, and a 2. Okay, that's a 5. That's a 1, that's a 2, that's a 3. That's nothing, that's nothing, that's a 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's a 1, that's a 6 all the way. That's a 2 in there, so that's a 3. That can't be anything. Neither can these. That's a 3. That's a 6, that's complete. That's a 2. There's nothing there. That's a 2 as well. That's 46. I mean the 5, that's 46 in there. So that's a 2. That's a 3. That's a 2. So that's nothing. So... Oh. Okay. Well, no falls with the 3. That has to be a 3. Okay, that's not false. It can be 4. That's nothing. So that's nothing. That's nothing as well. That's a 6. Okay, whoops, okay. The 3 has to go here. This has to be the 3, can't be the 5. That's all there, okay. That's a 2, that's nothing. That's a 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, that's a 7, that's a 6. That's a 1, that's a 2. The 2 goes there, oops, okay. The 7 goes up to there, that accepts that. That is done. That's a 1. So that's a 2, and that's a 2. Okay, that is nothing. Okay, that's a 2. So that's, well, that's a 3 in there. That's a 6. That's nothing. This is a 2. This is a 4. That's a 2. This is a 3. That's nothing. That's a 3. So that's that. That's a 1. So that's a 2. That's not a 3. So that's a 2 in there and there. Okay, that's a 3. So that's a 1, 2, and a 3. That's a 3. Okay, that's a 5. That's a 2 in there. That's a 6 in there. That's a 2. That's nothing. That's a 4. That's a 2. That's complete. That's a 2. That's there. That's all done. 3 there, that's there. That is a 6. That's a 3, okay. And I believe we're done with this. Oh, it is a flag. Oh, a cushion. Yeah, from the. Alright. I can see them here. Okay. We're halfway there to have all of these puzzles done. Let's just keep going. Okay. So 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 2, 1, 1, 2, 3. 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, and 1, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's not. 1, 2, that's 1, 2, yeah. Okay. What else? Oh, what can we do? This has to be the 1, so this has to be the 3, so this has to be nothing, this has to be nothing. 1, 2, 3, 3, 1, 2, okay. This is 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. That's help 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, okay. That does help. Has to be the 3. Okay, so that's not. That's a 1. This is at least a 2, so that's that, so that's a 3 and a 2, that's the closest to that one. That has to be the 1. A 1, okay, yes. Could this be a 3? It can't, there's no room, so the 3 has to go back here. That's the 3, and the 2, and another 3, so that's a 1 and a 3, that's a 2. Okay, that's not a 4. Uh, 1, 2, 1. This has to be a 1. This is a 1, that's a 3, that's a 2, that's a 2, that's a 2, 2, 2. Okay. So 1, 2, okay. That's nothing. So 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's 1 and 3. That's a 1. That's a 1 as well. That's a 1 and 1. That's a 1 there. Okay. What else? That's a 2. Okay. 1, 1, 1, 2. Okay. It's okay. 1, 1, 2, 3. Alright. That's probably 3, so that's not 2, that's not 2. It's 1, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's 1. Okay. That's a 2 and 2. That's a 2 and 2. That's a 1, 2, 2, 1. That's a 1 and 2. That's a 6. That's a 1. That is a 1 and 1. That's a 3. That's a 1, 2. Okay. That's a 2. That's a 3. That's a 5. That's a 1. So that's the 4. That's nothing. That's a 1. So that's the 3. That's 1, 1, 2, 2. Okay. That's a 2. That's a 2 as well. That's a 1. Nothing. 5, 2, 1. No. 1. Okay. And the 1. There we go. Tastes a cocktail. Cool. Alright. Only 9 more. Let's go. 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 4, 2, 2, 1, 1, 1. That's a 5, that's a 3, so that's a 7, that's too much. And the 8, that's a 1, and 6, and 2. Okay, that's a 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, that's a 4, and the 1, that's a 3, that's a 3. That's a 1, so that's a 3. I believe that cuts anything, so that's a 1. That's a 5. Well, there's a 9 there, too. That's a 3, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. 5, that's a 6. That's also a 6. So that's a 2, that's complete. That can't be anything. That has to be the 4. That has to be the 4, so that's the 1, that's a 2, that's nothing. That's... can't be the 2, so it has to be there. That's a 4, that's nothing, that's a 6. Okay, that's nothing. That extends to 6. The purple shells. Yeah. Okay. That's a 5, so that goes up to there. That's a 6, that's nothing. That's a 2. That's a 2. That's nothing. That's a 4. That's a 3. That's not a 4. That's part of the 4. This looks promising. 1, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Okay. 2, 1, 2, 3. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, that's not doing much. That's not doing much at all. What is she barking at? I wonder to myself. That's a 1. Okay. That leaves no room for the 2. That has to be edge. This has to be part of the 3, so it can't extend beyond that. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. That's a 1. This is the 1. That's a 1. That's nothing. That's a 2. That's That's a 3, that's a 1, that's a 2. That's not, that's a 2. That's a 2, that's a 3, that's a 2. Okay. That's a 9. That's a 2. Just like that. Okay, that's complete. That's a 1, so that's the 8, that's the 8, that's the 5. That's a 2, that's a 3. That's complete, that's a 2, that's nothing, that's the 5, that's nothing as well. That's complete. That's nothing, so that's a 6 incomplete. That's nothing, that's 4, so that's 3, that's a 3, so that's a 3. Missing stuff still, that's something. That's done, that's something. That's the 6, and the 4 in there. Let's go! The lifesaver. Oh, that's preserver. Alright. Okay, let's keep going. Let's go. What do we have here? So 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 5, that's a 1. That's a 2. 6. That can't be anything, so neither can these. Okay. It's the 6. Okay. What else? What else? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Bunch of ones. Okay. That must be 5, so that's a 1, 1, 3, 2. 5, okay, that's a 2, that's a 6. That's a 2, so that's nothing, that's a 2, that's a 2. That's a 2 as well, that's a 2. That's a 5. Okay. That's a 1, that's a 2. That's a 1, 1. Okay, that's those are 1s as well, so is this. That's a 2. So there's nothing else that way. Yeah, I don't know about this. That's a 2, I think, so that's why these are 1. And oh, a 7 in here. And the 6 in here, I'm pretty sure. Yep, so that makes it a 2. It's part of the 6, so that's not there. And that's 6, so that's a 3. And the 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Bunch of 1s. That's a 2, so that's that, that's that, that's a, okay. That's nothing, so that's a 6, that's a 1. That's nothing, so well. Right. Let's see. Okay, there's a 3 in there. That's a oh, either could be 4, so never mind. That's a 5, the 6, and the 4. Nothing else. 4, the 6. That's part of the 4. So that's nothing there. That's nothing else. That's a 3. And there's a 3. On the 3, okay, that's a 3 as well. Whoops. That's a 2, that's a 2 complete, so that's a 4, that's a 2, that's a okay, that's nothing. Either could be the 3, that is not true. This one, so that's 4. Okay, that's a 2, so that's a 7. That's the 1, that's the 6. Okay. That is nothing, that is nothing. That's the 5, so that's nothing. 4, that's the 3, that's the 5, that's one. Who broke? That's part of the 3. That's part of the 3 as well. Actually, this is part of the 2. That's a 1, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. That's a 1, 1, 2. That's a 1, so that's nothing. That's a 2, and a 1. That's a 4. So that's a 4. So those are 1s, that's a 4, that's complete, that's there, that's a 3 and 2, and the 3 and the 1, 1. A lab coat. Ooh. Yeah, let's just keep going. 5, 1. Okay, okay. 4, 1, 1, 1. 1, 1, 1, 1. 7. Okay, that's 3, that's 2, 2, okay. Um... Two, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. Oh, a 9. As you can see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, these are all ones. 3. This is probably a 1. Actually, it has to be. So that's 2 on the 1. It's 2. Okay. The 3, so that's the 5, so that's the 8, so that's a 2. That's a 2, that's a 2 as well. That's nothing, that's a 1, that's a 2 on a 5. Okay. 1, 2, 3. 2, 1, and 3. Okay, that is a 4. 1, 1, 1. Yes, let's go. What else? What else? What else? That's a 2. That's a 5 then. That's a 1. That's nothing. That's a 7 up to here. That's a 2. These are all 2s as well. Now, 6, 7, 8. Okay. That's a 4, a 1. Okay. That's a 3, 5, 7. We're saying numbers again. That's a 3. That's a 3 as well. That's a 3. That's a 3. That's a 2. That's nothing, so that's a 2, that's a 3. That's a 4 in there. That's a 1. A 2, that's a 3. And what's that? That's a full 9. Okay. That's a 1. That's a 2. Okay, that's a 1. That's complete as well. That means this is nothing. These are 3, 3. Okay, cool. There's nothing here. That means those and those are things. Wait, no, that doesn't make any sense. That should be complete. Okay. Alright. Never mind that. Okay, that's a 1 and a 3. Okay. I think that's a 2. That makes this a 5 complete. That's a complete 7. That's a 2. That's a 1. That's there. That's a 2. That's a 1. That's complete. That's complete as well. That makes this a 2 and 2. There. That's a 3 and a 4. So that's that. That's done and done. That is like that. It must be like this, and this. Let's go. Life test. Life checking. Okay, same thing. Okay, just 6 more to go. Okay, where do we start? Here, I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's 6, 3. That's a 2 because this is a 6. Okay. 5, 2, that's nothing. Bunch of 1s. That extends to 7 up to there. That's a 2. That's a 2 as well. This is 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 2. Okay. That's a 2. That's a full 7. That's a 4. That's a 3. That's a 1. That's a 2. That's nothing. So that's a 5. And that's a 2. So that's a 1. That's a 3. That's nothing. So that's actually the no. That's the 3. Could be. Also did not. Well, that's nothing, so this is one of the 6. And that's something, that's there, that's right there. That's a 3, yeah, that's a 5. Okay. 2 is the 6. The 3, okay. 4. 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3. Okay. Okay. That's a full 6, so that has to be the 1. It has to be the 4, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 4, 5, okay. And 6, 3, okay. Yeah, I don't know. 3, 4, 5, okay. 4, 1, 1, 1, 3, 1, okay. Oh no. There we go. That's a 3, that's a 1, and that's a 2, on a 1. That means the 4 has to be in here, so it has to be somewhere there. Which means these have to be here. That's a 6. That's a 5, that's a 1. It could be the 3. No, it can't. It has to be a 1. That's not it, so that's a 4. So these have to be the 3. And that has to be a 1. So that's that's a 1. This has to be a 2. It can't be there. That's a 3. That's a 1. That's a 1. That's nothing. And that's a 5. That's there. That's there. And that's nothing. So that's a 3. So the 1 is somewhere in here. That's a 1. So that's a 5 and a 1. That's nothing. That's a 6 in there. That's a 2 in there. That's nothing. So that's the 6. That's nothing. That's 2. Okay. So this has to be a 1. And I guess this has to be a 1 as well. Okay, and this can be anything else because it's a 5, so that has to be a 2, so that's a 1, that's a 1. That is 7, so that's a 1, and 2 on the 1, that's a 1. That's a, oops, that's a 2. Okay, that's a 2 in there. That's a 1. That's a 2, that's a 1. That is nothing. That's a 2 and a 2. That's a 1. That's there. That's a 1 and a 1. Okay, that's a 2. That's a complete 7. That's a 1. That's a 5. That's a 5. That's nothing. So that has to be a 4. And okay, there we go. Cool. But your keys. Okay. Yeah, let's just keep going. 6. Okay. Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's 5. Okay. Yes. There's something here. 2, 1, and a 3. Yeah, okay. Oh well, the 5 and the 1 will be here, so that's good. That's 1. Yeah, so that has to be a 1. Okay. No. Pretty much. Three, one, one. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, that's some more considerable progress. 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, okay. 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Okay. 1, 1, 2. Yeah, okay. 1, 1, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay. 1, 1, 1, 2, 3. That's nothing, I guess. Which means that's a 2. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, that's not doing much. 1, 1, 2, 3. Well, that's a 2, I think, so that makes this a 3. Okay. That's a 3. Okay. That's a 4. So that's a 2. So that's a 6. So that's a 1. That's the 8 all the way there. That's a 3. So this has to be a 6. So that has to be a 3. So that's a 1. So that's not. That's the 8 right there. Okay, that's a 5. That's a 4. That's a 5. That's a 3, 1, and 2. Okay. 3 and 1. That's a 4. That's a 2. And that has to be a 1. Can't be anything else. That's 2, 2, 1. 2, 1, 1. Okay. That's a 3, so that's a 2. That's a 2 there. That's a 5, 5. Okay. That's a 1. That's a 5. That's a 2. That's a 5 there. That's a 1 and 2. That's a 3. That's a 2 and 4. That's a 4 as well. That's a 1. That's a 2. That's a 1. That's a 4. That's a 2. Okay. That's a 2 and a 1. That's a 4. That's a 2. That's a 5. That is nothing. That's a 4 somewhere in there. That's a 6. Okay, so that's a 4 and a 2. And the 2 I meant. That's a 4. That's a 2. That's nothing. So that's a 5, so that's a 3, and the 1 in here, so that's nothing. That's a 3, that's a 3, that's a 4. That's a 4, so 1 and 2, that's nothing, so that's a 3, that's a 1. That's nothing, so that's a 4, so that's a 3, that's a 2 and 4, and we go. There we go. Desk lamp. Cool, a lamp. Like that, just like that. Oh, very similar. Okay, we're doing the last 4. That's a 9, so it's 2, 3, 1. That's 2 and the 2 cut with 3, so there we go. It's a 3 and 1, so the 5 has to go there. Yep. It's a 1 and a 1. And boom. 3, 3, 2, 2, 3. Okay, so it's a 1. 1, 2, so 4, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, so that's a 1 and 2, that's a 2, that's a 3, so that's a 4, that's the 7, so that's a 1 and 1, and 1 and 1, and 1, 2, 4, 5, that's a 3, so that's a 2, that's a 4, so that's a 2, 3, that's a 5, so that's a 1, so that's a 3, so that's a 5. That's an 8, so it goes all the way up to there. That's a 5, so that's not there. That's a 2, and that's a 1. That's part of the 9, that's a 4. That's nothing. So 1, 1, 2. Oh, that's a 2 there. Right. That's 8. That's a 1. That could be a 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1. No, it can't, so it has to be the 2 and the 3. They change the 1 in there, so that's a 2. That's a 1. That's a 3. Okay. Cool, that's a 1 and a 3. That's a 3, that's a 2. That's nothing, so that can't be the 9. So the 9 goes up to there, so that's the 1. That's 5, that's a 2. That's a 3, so that's a 1. No, it isn't. Okay, so that's a 5. That's a 3, that's a 8. So that's a 1. That's a 3, that's a 2. That's a 4, that's that. So that's a 2. Okay, that's a 3, that's a 3, that's nothing, that's a 4, that's a 8, that's a 3, that's down, that's a 3, that's down, that's a 7. Okay, that's a 1. That's a 4. That's a 1. So that's the 4, that's a 3, that's a 1 and a 1. That's a 2 and a 3, that's 1 and 3, that's 1 and 5. There, so that's a 3, that's a 3, that's a 3, that's a 2. That's a 1, so that's a 1. Okay. That's a 2, so that's a 1, that's a 1. So that's 5, that's a 3, that's a 5 as well. It's nothing that is there, so that's the 5, that's complete. So that's 4 and 3 there. That's nothing, nothing, and 2. That's a 1 and something else. Okay. Better be pretty sure. Maybe? I hope so, I hope so. It feels like we made a mistake somewhere, but so far it's working out. Okay, that's a 1, 1, 1. Okay, let's go. What's this? Oh, okay. Okay. Oh, we're doing the S rank one, so this might be larger than all the other ones. Well, not yet. Maybe the final one. Two, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay. That's a bunch of ones. Okay. That's a 1 as well, and so are these. That's a 1 as well. That's a 1 as well. That's a 1. That's a 1. That's nothing, so that's a 2, and then 9. Okay. Let's roll the 5. That's a bunch of ones. Okay, so that's the 5. That's a 2. It's nothing and nothing. That's a 2, and the 5, that's a 1. That's 1, and the 1, 2, 3. That's the 3, that's a 2. That's the 4. No, that's the 4. Okay, so that's a 3, that's a 1, 1. That's a 2, so that's a 3. Okay, so that's nothing. So that's the 3. That's nothing. That's the 1, so that's the 4, that's a 3. That could be anything. Actually, this has to be the 3, right? That's a 2, so that's the 1 and the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's a 1 and a 1 and a 1. Okay, that's an 11 all the way there, so that's a 6 and a 3. Okay, that's a 1. All these are 1s, except this one is a 4, that's a 1. That's a 2 and a 3 and a 1. That is complete, so that's a 2, so that's a 1 and a 1, that's a 4. That's a 3, so that's 2 and 2, okay. That's a 1, that's a 2 and a 3 and something. That's the 1, so that's the 9, so that's the 11. Okay. 2, 2, okay, so there's a 2 in there. These can't be anything. Oh, no. 2 and 3. Actually, this has to be the 3, and the 2 can't be there. It doesn't fit. 2, 1, 2. Okay. That has to be a 1, so that's nothing. That's there. That's a 4, so that's a 2. That's nothing. That's a 2. That still be. That's a 2. That's a 2. That's nothing. That's a 4. That's a 2. There's nothing else there. That's a 1. Okay. That's a 3 on the 2 on the 3 on the 2 and the 3 on the 2 on the 3 on the 2 on the 3 on the 3. Find. Oh, there we go. What's this? Shipping crate. Okay. Oh, there's up 2 more. Let's go. Let's go. That's what I've got. That's a biggie. 1 1 1 1 1 1. That's a 7. So that's 8 ones. 4 3. Okay, that's a 2. So that's that. That's that. And how much is that? That's 10. So 3 more. Okay. 3. So that's a 5. Okay. Those got 3. That's a 3. That's a 2. Okay. So 13 extends to there. 3 and a 4. That's a 3 3 3 2 3. That extends to 3. The 2 and 2. Okay. That's a 9 all the way there. That's a 1 and 2. That's a 4. That extends these 4. That's nothing else. Okay. Oh, that's a 14. That goes all the way there, I believe. That's a 1 and 4. 2, 2, 3, 4, and 3. That's a 3. That's a 12. Goes all the way there. Nothing. That's a 3. That's a 5. 2 and 2. That's nothing. Yeah. That's a 3. That's a 1. That's a 2 and a 1. That's a 2. That's a 4. Let's say 4 in there. Okay. That's a 3. So that's nothing. That's 13, 14. That's a 2. That's a 3. That's a 2. That's a 3. Okay. That's a 3. That's a 14. 2, 4, 2. Okay. That's a 2 as well. That's a 2. Okay. Oh, these rows are good. That's good to know. That can't be anything, and that can't be anything. So that has to be the 1. That's a 2, that's a 3, that's a 14. That's nothing, that's a 5, that's complete. That can't be anything, so 5. That's a 3 all the way there, that's a 5, I'm pretty sure. That's a 4, that's a 6 all the way there, that's a 3. That's a 3, so that's that. That's also a 3, that's all complete. That can't be anything, so that's a 4, so that's a 6. And it has to be 1. Okay, okay. 2, 2. That has to be the 4. Yeah. The 3 goes there. There's that, there's that. That's a 2. That's a 4. That's a 2. That's a 3. That's a 4. That's a 6. Like that. Yes, it is. That's done. That's a 2. That's a 3. That's 1. That's 1 and 1. That's 2. That's the 3 up to there. Oh, so that's a so that's a 1. So that's a 4. That's a 1. And so is that. That's done. That's a 3. That's all done. That's a 2 and a 1. That's a 1. That's a 1. That's a 2. There we go. That's a 2. That's complete. That's a 2 on the 1. That's a 2. That's a 2. Okay, so this is all done. That's a 1. There we go. What's this? Lifeboat. Oh, it's the missing lifeboat. That's fun. Finally, we have just the 1 puzzle remaining. Let's see what it is. Yeah, okay. No. Oh, this is the biggest puzzle we've done, I think. It's a 15 by 20. There's 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 2, 3, and 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's good. That's a 5, so that's that. There's nothing here. That's a 5. That's a 5, and that's a 5 as well. So this is a 5 as well. That is a 5 as well. That is a 5 as well. This has to be the 9 on the 1. 2. Okay. Okay. Okay, probably you can do something like that. 7, 1, 2, okay, all the way there. Okay, this has to be the 9, right? Oh, there we go. Okay. Oh, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's pretty cool. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay. Three, 1, 2, 3, okay. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's just like, yeah, that's a 1. That's a 3, 3, 4, 4, 2, 4. Okay, this can't be a part of the 5. Oh, actually, wait, what's going on? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, never mind. Yeah, there we go. That makes way more sense. Okay, so that's a 2. Yeah, that's a 1. That's a 7 in there, so that's a 5. Okay, that's a 4. That's not just done. Done. That's a 3. Could be the 5. Yeah. Oh. Okay. Yeah, there's also that. Well, it's supposed to be the 9. And is that 9? No, that's 8. We don't know which side it extends to. We know it extends to one of them. Okay, one for the 4. So much we can do with that. Okay. Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Right. So it's both a part of 3. 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 6. But this has to be a 3. Okay. So this has to be part of a 4. That's nothing. This has to be at least part of a 3. Actually, can't be part of a 4. That's a 3. Okay, so that is a 4. That is a 3. Yeah, that's a 4. That's a 2, and that's a 2. That's nothing, and that's nothing. Yeah, okay. That's a 2 up to there. That one right there. Yeah. That's a 2. So this is a 4. Okay. That's a 2. That's a 3? No, actually that can't be anything. I must have done something wrong then. Oh yeah, of course I did. That's nothing. So that's nothing either. Okay. So that's nothing. Okay, cool. Yeah. Missing a 4 in there, so there's that. There's that, that's a 1. That's a 4, that's a 3. I don't know that. That's 1, that's 4, that's 5. Okay. This is nothing, because that's been put to the 3, so it's this way. That's a 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That's a 9. 5. Okay. This has to be a 2. That's a 5. That's a 2, that's a 4, that's a 9. All the way over there. That is a 3. And that is a 2. That's nothing, so that's the 5. That's nothing, so that's the 5. So that's nothing, and that's nothing. So that's 3, that's the 6, that's the 5. That's a 5, that's a 7. That's a 2. Okay. Here that's a 9, that's a 5, so that's the 4. No, actually, it's still be the 2. But this is a 2, and that makes this complete, and this is a 2, and that makes this, and this is a 2, and that makes this. Yeah, so this is the 4. That is a 4 complete, that's a 4 complete, that's a 3, that is a 9 there, that's a 2. That's one of the 3s, that's the 3, that's the 1, that's a 4 and a 1. That's a 1 as well, so that's a 1, and 3, and 2, and 3, okay. That is there, that completes that, that's a 3, okay. This is done, I'm done, I'm done. 1, 1, 2, 3, okay. Okay. Oh, that's a 3 as well, so that's that, that's complete. That's a 2. This is a 1. That's a 2. There's that's 1, that's a 3. That's a 3, and the 1, that's a 2. That's a 2, there's nothing in there, that's a 2, that's complete. That is done as well, that's a 2, that's nothing, that's a 1. We're done. This was the last puzzle, wasn't it? Swap it. Yeah. So there we go. We solved every puzzle there is in this game. Alright. Yeah, that was fun. I mean, what can I say? I love Picross. Yeah. Again, it's a bit underwhelming, but it doesn't do anything. It doesn't show you any sort of message like, yeah, you solved every puzzle in the game, congratulations, you unlocked this memory or whatever. So yeah, that's underwhelming, I think. But let's see, we've unlocked every one of Scout's memories, so let's just watch them. Okay, I'm just noticing that the text blips and a bunch of sound effects that happen during dialogue are very low in volume. But the sound effects in the puzzle were relatively okay, which makes me think that the volume, the sound effect volume controls them differently, or they are regulated differently. I don't know, but I don't. Yeah, I think there's something wrong with that. The music sounds fine, right? The music doesn't sounds fine here and in the puzzles, but the sound effects in the dialogue and the sound effects in the puzzles have different volumes, I think, and I don't know why that could be. And in any case, I can't change them in the middle of the dialogue. I think I should be able to. There should be a menu here, or maybe there is? No, I don't think there is. Yeah, no, doesn't seem like it. I can't find it. So that's a shame. Yeah, there you go, that sound effect. I could barely hear it. Oh, okay. Yeah, increasing in volume. Then I get the memory, huh? If you be next words. Yeah, so the sound effect control affects both of them, affects the text blips and the dialogue sound effects. That's strange. I think they're weirdly calibrated. Okay. That's weird. It feels like there are 3 different volumes in here. Like there's the text blips, there's the sound effects, and then there's the sound effect that plays when you go to the next line. And they're all like weirdly with different volumes. I don't understand. That's weird. Okay. All right. Okay, yeah. Well, that's the game, I think. I don't think there's anything left to do. So yeah. Yeah, I have my notes in here, and I'm gonna have to write some more because these are the ones that I had, like, just from this session today. Um, yeah, I'm gonna have to review everything, I think, just to make sure that I don't forget anything. Then again, that's the point, that's the whole point as to why I recorded them. So yeah, I'm gonna be reviewing them, I think. Yeah, alright. It was fun. It was a fun game. And if I find another game that has pros in it, I'll probably be playing that one as well, you know, as research. So yeah, until next time, I guess. Bye.